Hello, and welcome to Creepycore and Folklore, the show about creatures, encounters, old tales, and myths. I'm your host, Iona Wayland, a dark fantasy author, mental health professional, and overall curious person. I want to join other spooky souls and hear about these unusual stories. Hello, spooky soul, and welcome back to the next episode of Creepycore and Folklore. The babo is finally asleep. My husband has finally stopped using the tractor, and so maybe this will work out in this little pocket of time that I have. But something that's really cool that happened that's unrelated to the topic I'm about to talk about in a second. I just wanted to say that we went on this really wonderful walk. Like, me and the babo went on this spooky stroll together, and she had dancy feet, which is what is basically like the baby zoomies, where she was like fighting a nap. So she's been walking a lot more. It was really lovely, really beautiful day to do it. But there was this moment where she got tired, so I put her in the stroller, and this barred owl just silently swooped right in front of us, like from one edge of the woods to the other, and it went low, like right in front of the stroller, and it was so gorgeous. It was like such a cool experience. I got goosebumps all over my body because I was like, what just happened? This is so cool. I've only ever seen the little owls that are kind of loud at night, but it was just cool to see, like, have that experience and to connect with my baby in that way, because both of us, after the owl swooped like just from one edge to the other and just immediately disappeared, both of us went, ooh. So we were so surprised, and it was so beautiful. But I just wanted to tell you about that because that was a really cool thing that's never happened to me before. And it just goes to show that, like, walking around the woods and forest bathing is very good for the soul. But now to the actual topic that I wanted to speak with you about. So it's been suggested to me by S.M. Pierce. They're an author of queer dark fantasy. It's really cool. And their book Natural Outlaws and Fractured Sovereignty is coming out, and it's really cool because it's going to depict Arrow characters and Ace characters. So if you're really interested in like queer platonic relationships, like QPRs and stuff like that, I think you might like it. It's not out yet, but if you want to check it out, their socials are at SM Pierce, spelled Pearce, author. But what was suggested was that I do an episode about changelings, and I was really excited because I wanted an opportunity to talk about changelings and kind of the really layered past of them, but I also wanted to do so with care, and I also wanted to use the opportunity to talk about doppelgängers as well. Also, this is the first time I'm ever living, this total side note, but my husband's back on the tractor, so if you hear that, I'm really sorry. My babo is stirring, so if you hear that, I'm just keeping it going because she's not quite awake but not quite asleep. And the AC, as super thankful as I am for the first time ever living in a place with central air, it's so nice, especially because it's been in the 90s and hundreds this month. But the AC is going, and sometimes that shows up on the audio, so just like bear with me while I tell you about changelings and doppelgangers. But something that's always been fascinating to me is looking at that quote, "what's really you," end quote kind of thought. Being like a therapist, I get that question a lot in general, just because like when you're being really introspective, you kind of have this existential moment or period of time in your life where you're questioning, like, who am I? Who do I want to be? What does that even mean to me? So there's that end of it, but also ever since I learned, there's like this physiological moment too, where I learned that we have more non-human cells that make us up than human cells. And I felt really weird about it. I'm like, what are we? So like, what makes me me? Is it my outer shell? Is it my appearance? Is it my soul or my uniqueness? A mixture of both? So I think that's something that ever since humans have been self-aware have been something that we kind of struggle to grasp, because it's such an abstract concept. Also, like, if I can be really, really vulnerable with you for a moment and share that I recently found a new sibling, and we look a lot alike, and I have many similar interests with them, which is really wild to me, and that kind of just adds to the mystery. And that's just not, I guess I'm sharing it now, but it was something that's been going on for a couple months, and it's just really interesting to be like, what makes me me, my roots, or who I choose to be, or my uniqueness, or a mixture of all three. Personally, I think it's a mixture of all three, but it is very interesting to see like similar interests, favorite colors the same, things we studied in school are the same. It's just very, very weird, but very cool to get to know them. But, it brings up the whole nature, nurture, who am I, what am I? And I know I briefly mentioned this with my interview with River Robbins a few episodes back. It's called Horrific Interviews with River Robbins, if you want to listen to us geek out about horror movies with our wildly different tastes. But one of the movies by Jordan Peele touches on this in a way. I won't give you spoilers this time. Don't worry, you don't have to skip ahead. Also, I'm really sorry now the roosters are cawing. I don't understand why everything is loud right now. So today I'm going to talk about things that parallel that fear and idea. So this episode 54 is going to be all about changelings and doppelgängers. Throughout history, tales of changelings have captivated the human imagination, and it weaves this intricate story of supernatural beings who replace human infants. And these mythical creatures, often found in European folklore, have fascinated different generations and had this like thought of like deception and this mysterious origins. So we're going to explore the concept of changelings, examine the roots of the legends, and shed light on the psychological theories that attempt to explain their existence. So like I mentioned before, changelings have roots in European folklore, particularly in Celtic and Scandinavian traditions. According to these specific legends, because there are many different kinds of changeling legends out there, but these in particular, they were believed to be fairies, trolls, or other supernatural entity that would replace a human baby with their own. And this exchange was thought to occur for a couple reasons. One was maybe that the fairies desired having a human child or children, that they wanted to bestow their supernatural abilities on them. Another one might be that they wanted to give their own babies the best chance possible with human caregivers, or to trick humans, just to trick humans, because sometimes that's just like a fae lore thing that's a common thread in some of these folk tales. There were several like characteristics. I will get way more into this later, but there are several characteristics that indicate if there is a changeling. These signs include physical differences, unusual behavior, physical deformities, or slower development. I'm sure you can already start picking up on what I'm going to talk about later. Changelings were thought to like do that whole phrase of like eat you out of house and home with this like insatiable appetite, and then also they were said to have an aversion to religious symbols. Parents who suspected that their child was a changeling resorted to like rituals and methods to expose and then replace them with their original offspring. So from a psychological perspective, changelings belong to like this realm of folklore, but psychologists and scholars have explored the possible psychological origins of these legends. One theory is that changelings could be explained by the presence of developmental or psychological markers in infants. So this is where I'll get more into neurodivergence later, but for instance, autism, any intellectual or developmental delay. Also, those should not be conflated. They're two different things. Some people have both diagnoses. some people just have one or the other. I've noticed a lot of people, like, not to, you already know this most likely, but just in case you don't, like, autism doesn't mean developmental or intellectual delay. Those are two different diagnoses, and they're often conflated with each other. When these things were going on, because autism's not a new thing, neurodivergence isn't a new thing, intellectual disabilities, physical disabilities, these are all not new things, but without understanding fully what they were back in the day, this would lead to beliefs of supernatural replacements. There's also not just psychological backgrounds, but there are some genetic disorders, such as like Williams syndrome, or Cri-du-Chat syndrome. And these also may have contributed to the belief in changelings because they kind of manifest in these physical and cognitive differences. And that can also lead to some misunderstandings or misconceptions about the nature of your own child. Something else to take into account is postpartum mental health. So this is, you probably already know this again, but this is something I've had to explain a lot to even members of my own family. Postpartum just means after you give birth, like that's it. And then postpartum, like psychosis or obsessive compulsive thoughts, intrusive thoughts, trauma, depression, anxiety, all those things, postpartum, insert one of those descriptors, just means that these symptoms started after you gave birth and most likely is like a result of like hormone stuff, body recovery, mental recovery of being pregnant and giving birth, which is a big fucking deal. It's really tough on the body and the mind. And I really hope that whoever goes through the process of being pregnant and giving birth has lots of happiness and health coming their way, because it's a huge change to your body and your brain. But keeping postpartum mental health in mind, there's this other perspective that considers the impact of these health issues that may happen or the perception of changelings. So like if someone has postpartum depression or psychosis, they might experience delusions or hallucinations that make them think that their child has been replaced. Also, bonding with your baby is so important afterward. And if someone is struggling to bond with their child, which is something that can totally happen, it does not mean you're a bad parent or a bad caregiver or anything like that. It's just something that you have to grow through and connect with your baby. Also, this is me saying this in like a friend way, not in a clinician way, because I'm taking this from the folklore lens, but also in like a reassuring moment, because I think everybody's experience is different if someone does decide to have children. But I just don't want you to feel alone if you have struggled to connect with a baby or your own baby in the past, because it can be a hurdle that people go through. And so with this kind of like mental distance from the child, a person can also maybe think that like, well, that's maybe like not my baby, and that can really affect the way someone sees their child. And back in the day, again, like now we can be like, well, I don't feel good, I feel like ill, and this isn't how I wanted my postpartum to be, and I want it to be different, and I want it to be healthier. And there are like options for people to like recognize that what they're going through is not something they should have to go through alone, nor does it mean there's anything wrong with them or their child. But back in the day when this was happening, it's really easy to like blame it on a changeling situation, and kind of chalk it up to something mystical and superstitious. So like the concept of changelings varies across different cultures, and there are many different interpretations and explanations. Like in some cultures, offerings or rituals were performed to appease the fairies and protect human infants, but others believe that changelings could be identified and returned to their supernatural origins. So exploring these diverse cultural interpretations helps us understand like the complex and rich history of changeling folklore. It's funny because I was going to get more into that later. I still will, but I just had to take a second to like really explain, because I feel like this is an extremely delicate topic. I think it should be handled with care, and I think it's important that we talk about it. But then what's really interesting is that doppelgangers were what came to mind for me, because it's that whole like, this is a double of somebody, and I don't know like if this is the true person or not. Or you may feel like, as the person in some of these stories, that there is a double of you wreaking havoc or copying you or even doing good deeds as well. Doppelgangers are one of those like fascinating yet potentially fear-inducing stories. It's like this idea that a person can encounter their exact look-alike. It's often interpreted as an omen of misfortune or death, but not always. Its roots are in German folklore specifically, where they were believed to originally be evil apparitions or, quote, double walkers, end quote. So like Johann Wolfgang von Goethe's Faust, or Edgar Allan Poe's William Wilson, and Fyodor's Dostoevsky's, I'm so sorry, I haven't read this one, The Double, all further popularized this idea of doppelgangers as eerie spectral beings or symbolic reflections of ourself. I see it more as a literary symbol than anything, but also the fact that the folklore goes so far back, it does kind of show that these were people trying to make sense of what they were seeing. There are a bunch of historical accounts that document encounters with doppelgangers. For instance, Abraham Lincoln and Catherine the Great both have alleged experienced sightings or premonitions involving their doubles. This is where I'm like trying to save all my like conclusions for the end, but it's not working. I tried a different style of like outlining how I was going to speak about things to try and keep myself on track, and I think it's kind of working more than usual, but also I need to rant about this. Anxiety sometimes can make us visualize ourselves in these horrible situations. Not just anxiety, there's a whole host of other like thought patterns or stress inducing situations that make us like envision ourselves like something horrible happening, but also on the flip side, something really wonderful happening. And it doesn't mean that that thing will or will not happen. It's just something the brain does to like prepare us. So thank you for letting me like blab about this in the middle of everything and mess up my outline real quick. I just don't want you to hear this and be like, oh my God, I've thought that too, and think that something horrible is going to happen, because that's just not the case. But these encounters have been associated with these moments of intense stress, illness, or like impending doom, which to me, as a clinician looking at stress, illness, and impending doom, that sounds like a panic attack to me. And some brains just show these awful movies that you're going to go through to try and to protect you, even though nothing bad is happening. So I just like really want to be intentional when talking about this. There are people called parapsychologists, which I had never heard of before at all. I still don't fully understand what that is, but I think it's interesting. And paranormal enthusiasts, they've explored the phenomenon of doppelgangers, and they offer a couple theories to explain these eerie encounters. Some suggest that doppelgangers are a form of astral projection, and that's where like your consciousness or energy kind of separates from your body for a little bit and creates a ghostly duplicate. Others say that doppelgangers could be residual energy imprints remaining after a person's death or traumatic event. That one doesn't really make sense to me, because I thought doppelgangers was your own experience seeing like another you, but I guess it could be like there are some people who feel like they've talked to like an apparition of you after you've died, but I just thought that was like after someone died, but I thought that would just be like a ghost. So that one doesn't make as much sense to me as the astral projection theory does. There's also the mirror image phenomenon, and that's what I think happens whenever I stare into like my crystal ball, or if someone looks into the mirror too long, It's basically like if you look at yourself in the mirror, it can lead to like some dissociative states. So some people might start seeing distortions in their own reflection, or a sense of detachment from their identity of themselves or their body. And that could also contribute to the phenomenon of the doppelganger type of sightings from someone seeing themselves. I also think that like when someone's in a really stressful situation and you're asking yourself, like, who am I? What's my next decision? What do I do? What's even happening to me? That can cause a lot of like these depersonalization moments during like a trauma, which is like a type of dissociation. So I think it's interesting to think about how like naturally as humans we are kind of like made to question who we are as people and to try and find recognition in ourselves. And if we have that like disillusionment, that we often try and look for ourselves or find ourselves. And I think that's like ingrained into humans as a whole. There's also Capgras syndrome. It's a psychological disorder that is this belief that you have been replaced by an imposter, or that people you see have been replaced by an imposter. People with this condition can like experience also like the opposite, where there's like a familiarity and recognition in the presence of a stranger to them too. Or they can meet someone and think that it is someone they know, but they perceive them as an identical twin or doppelganger. And understanding these disorders can kind of show us that maybe there are these psychological like roots to the doppelganger phenomena. Even though the word doppelganger and these specific doppelganger stories and folk tales that are really popular are rooted in Germany, it also transcends cultural boundaries. Each culture offers their own interpretation. So like for instance, in Norse mythology, the Vardøger is a supernatural entity that precedes a person and mimics their actions and appearance. And then in Japanese folklore, there's the Itako, which refers to a doppelganger that signals the imminent death of an individual. And then like by taking just these kind of overlapping cultural interpretations, it helps us understand the doppelganger beliefs more collectively. And it is a really, like for both the doppelganger and the changeling depictions, it blurs that boundary between supernatural and psychological. It could be viewed as an ominous apparition, symbolic reflections of self, manifestations of psychological phenomena. Changelings and doppelgangers have this very prominent place in human folklore and literary works. And if we look at different like parts of humanity and different parts of the world, it makes sense as to why these kinds of stories pop up. Here's where I really want to hone in on the psychological perspective, and specifically related to neurodivergence. So in case you don't know, neurodivergence is anything that you're born with, but different symptoms, both good and ones that hinder your life, and then some that are just like neutral, can pop up as you age. But it's the way your brain is wired, and the way there's like more studies showing about like the brain prunes certain things, and the way processing, the reasons why processing might be even faster or slower depending on the individual that's neurodivergent, all that stuff. But also neurodivergence, just as a quick recap, includes all sorts of stuff. It's not just autism, but of course autism is the one that I think is most well known as being neurodivergent. ADHD, dyslexia, dyspraxia, OCD, Tourette's, dyscalculia. I know I'm forgetting some. There's a lot that includes this kind of like this physical way the brain processes information. I'm reluctant to call it like a difference, because it's like different than what? Like different than neurotypical people, because I don't think we should center everything around neurotypical people. But like, I guess different than how society centers neurotypical people. And I myself have a couple of these diagnoses, and maybe you also are questioning if you're neurodivergent or not, or you're not, but you want to be a really good ally, or you've been diagnosed, and then I want to say welcome to the club. But wherever you are on this, I just wanted to quickly recap, even though you might already know this information. But this gives us a unique perspective on it, because there's a lot of misunderstanding of neurodivergence. Historically, neurodivergent people would face like a lot of stigma and misunderstanding. I mean, that happens now. There's a lot more acceptance of neurodivergence and why it's important. But in the past, it was even less so. But it is this natural variation in neurological structure and functioning that results in a diverse way of thinking, perceiving, and experiencing the world. And this might have contributed to the belief in changelings as a way to explain the differences in behavior, cognition, and social interactions that people's children or just people in general would have, just in that historical context. On the flip side is that there are many autistic individuals that draw parallels between their experiences and the concept of changelings in particular. They may perceive societal norms and expectations as an attempt to, quote, change or, quote, replace their authentic selves. Some autistic people also relate to the feeling of being misunderstood or alienated, just like the mythical changeling displacement within human society. The relationship between changelings and neurodivergence varies across different cultures, of course, but these diverse cultural perspectives gives us a more nuanced understanding of the complex intersectionality between folklore and neurodivergent experiences, and it highlights the importance of considering multiple narratives and viewpoints. Recognizing this connection between changeling folklore, and I've talked about other kinds of folklore that have this has this kind of intersectionality as well, but this can give us a unique opportunity to promote acceptance and understanding and appreciation of neurodivergent individuals. And by challenging these outdated stereotypes and promoting neurodiversity acceptance, we can create a more inclusive and compassionate society as a whole. With its tales of supernatural replacements, there's a lot that intersects with the experience of neurodivergent individuals. And although changeling legends were born out of a historical misconception potentially, exploring the parallels between changelings and neurodivergence sheds light on a need for greater awareness and acceptance. And by embracing the principles of neurodiversity and fostering understanding, we can build a more inclusive society that celebrates the unique strengths and perspectives from all individuals. So thanks for letting me tell you about changelings and doppelgängers, and where there's some disability and neurodivergent intersectionality there. I appreciate you listening, and I will talk to you next week. Thanks to all you spooky souls out there for listening to Creepy Core and Folklore. Follow on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, and TikTok if you're looking for more uncanny content. If you have your own tales to tell, you can email creepycoreandfolklore@gmail.com. If you liked this, please leave a review wherever you get your podcasts, or tell a friend who might enjoy these stories to spread the word. If you're interested in dark fantasy, check out my Hollowverse series. Ashes is available now in paperback and ebook on Amazon and audiobook on Audible, and the sequel is underway. I'm Iona Wayland, and I'll see you next time.